This is kind of a general framework, all right, for thinking about democratic stability. And the point I'm trying to make is the one I closed with the other day, that if you study this, this extremely complicated, possibly ludicrously complicated diagram, you will hopefully just grasp a few key points. One is that most of the structural factors affecting the stability and quality of democracy, but certainly the stability of democracy, pass through this box that's called legitimacy. And many of them, first pass through the box of performance before it gets to legitimacy. These are crucial mediating variables. If a country has a political culture that is so strongly committed to the legitimacy of democracy that nothing can shake it, no matter where it came from, then all of this other stuff is less important, at least in terms of shaping the stability of democracy, okay? Some of this, obviously, if you have a vigorous civil society, you're going to have, a richer, more participatory democracy. I think that's almost true by definition. And all other things being equal, which they may not be, you tend to have a higher quality of democracy as a result. If you have a strong state and a strong rule of law and an independent judiciary that are able to maintain a strong rule of law, you're going to have better protection for individual rights and better, a more liberal democracy as a result, again, almost by definition. So some of these things have independent effects on the quality of democracy. And I think there's a strong relationship between the quality of democracy and people's judgments about the legitimacy of democracy, and we'll get into that later in the class. But in terms of is democracy going to survive or fail? There's only 2 or 3 things here, and really I would point to 2, that are going to determine whether democracy survives or fails, that are kind of independent of, and I don't even think they are fully independent of, but at least somewhat independent of beliefs about legitimacy. Now, at the risk of asking the obvious, since you're looking at the slide, what are those 2 things? Yeah?
Effective performance and legitimacy.
Okay, so I'm asking a different question. I'm asking what can affect democratic stability without passing through legitimacy?
Civilian supremacy over the military.
Okay, why would that be the case?
I don't know. They could coup.
They could stage a military coup. So if you think of 2 political systems, okay? Each have, and this is the reality in the world, middling, messy, kind of, alternating levels of democratic legitimacy. People kind of, in the ideal world, they'd kind of like democracy in the abstract, but they're kind of disillusioned with their politicians. And so it's kind of a messy situation in terms of legitimacy. It's not deep and unconditional, but it's not absent either. Now think about one political system where there's no civilian control over the military. The military as an institution is really kind of an extremely powerful, extremely resourceful, extremely ambitious, and quite independent actor. And think of another political system where, for whatever historical reasons, the military has been tamed and subdued institutionally. And there are strong relations of civilian supremacy over the military. In those two situations, it should be obvious. The former country is going to be much more, with the same level of legitimacy, is going to be much more liable to democratic interruption than the latter country. The latter may stumble on, and the former may stumble, like Pakistan, through one military coup or military imposition after another. And the latter, the former type of instance, again, take Pakistan for a moment, or Thailand now, may pass through multiple iterations of an ambiguous situation that isn't clearly democratic and isn't transparently non-democratic either, but has this kind of weird mixed system that Pakistan has now, where, yeah, there was an election, yes, there was alternation in power again, by the way, yes, there's now a new elected government, but the most powerful decision-making force in the country is the military. Okay, so that is a brief explanation of that. What's the other one?
Oh, I had a question about the first
Okay.
one. So I'm curious, even for like military coups to, I guess, succeed, doesn't the military have to have some level of legitimacy so people are like disenchanted with the current system?
Okay, that's a very good question. Did you all hear it? Once the military stages a coup, doesn't the military itself have to have some level of legitimacy in order to be able to rule? Okay? So let me ask a prior question. Does the military need some level of legitimacy in order to be able to stage a successful coup? Right? And here, I think it's a very appropriate question. And the literature tells us that as a general rule, particularly the higher up you go in the officer chain, rather than, just kind of getting some hot-headed lieutenant colonel who's kind of taken it into his mind that he's going to save the country, coups are less likely to happen, and they're much less likely to succeed if there isn't some popular base of support, permission, or willingness for them. So we know what happened in Turkey, and when was it, 2016?
2015.
15, when once again the military in Turkey tried to overthrow an elected civilian government. Now, by then I don't even think it could be called democratic anymore, but it certainly was elected and had strong support from about half the population and had at least formal constitutional legitimacy. And there was passionate support for Erdogan among his base, and there was not, widespread popular enthusiasm for the military as the answer to Erdogan's deepening authoritarianism. And in addition, the coup was poorly planned and it failed. Before he came to power by the ballot box at the end of 1990s, Hugo Chavez, as a colonel, staged 2 military coup attempts. Both of them failed because there was, at that time, strong support for the legitimacy of democracy as a system of government in Venezuela, even though Chavez correctly detected that there was rising disenchantment with the ruling kind of political class in Venezuela and its corruption, inequality, elitism, and so on. So yes, the military is not immune from all this. Okay, what's the other independent actor here?
International environment.
Okay,
So, the example.
how could that play out?
What's coming to my mind is Ukraine, where even if you're some sort of quasi-democratic, moving towards at least a bit of an electoral democracy, if there are other countries that are not favorable to democracy in your region, they're likely to undermine you, as in the case of Russia, whereas if there are countries that are democratic in your region, maybe make the case with like NATO with the Baltic states, why something similar hasn't happened, is they have stronger support from.
Okay. Any of our Ukrainian fellows want to comment on this?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I believe, first of all, Ukraine is definitely a fully electoral democracy. It absolutely fits all definitions that we discussed a few classes ago. On the other hand, I agree with like main idea that Russia can and actively try to stop liberal democracy formation in Ukraine. Yeah, it's really good example.
So we have, we have an autonomous factor here in the international environment that could, in theory, put an end to democracy independent of political views within the country about the legitimacy of the regime. First of all, Hitler can just invade Poland, end of story, goodbye, whatever level of democracy, sovereignty, and constitutionalism existed in Poland or before that the Czech Republic. It is certainly plausible, I am increasingly worrying, more than plausible, that the People's Republic of China leadership in Beijing could, through a variety of exertions of coercion, maybe short of actual invasion, but there are lots of other coercive tools that countries have in the contemporary world, including digital warfare, undermine or eclipse or put an end to democracy in Taiwan, whether you call Taiwan a country, a political system, a part of China, or whatever you want to call it. And so, powerful countries can autonomously terminate democracy in other countries. And then you get the more complicated situation where powerful external actors, and they don't all have to be authoritarian actors. We could talk again about United States foreign policy and the role it played in overthrowing elected governments from time to time elsewhere in the world. But the paradigmatic case is what appears to be a significant level of complicity of the United States government under President Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger in encouraging and at a minimum giving a strong green light to the September 1973 coup that overthrew the elected government of Salvador Allende. So now if you think about that, we'll come back to all of this when we talk about democratic breakdowns, you see, it's not really just black and white. You see several factors interacting. What enabled and induced the Chilean military acting, to detach itself from norms of civilian supremacy in a country that had, by the way, Chile, a long tradition of pretty strong democracy within Latin America and pretty clear civilian supremacy over the military? What induced the military to act in 1973? I don't think the issue would have arisen if we come back to some of the other things. Chile had not become so incredibly politically polarized. Now, why was it polarized? Well, we're going to talk about the party system, and we're going to talk about the electoral system, which created, which took the deep, raw divisions in Chilean society and translated them into politics in a very, very polarizing way, basically left versus right, not much in between, with the center kind of disappearing. This is why electoral systems, where the heck is that? Well, we start with institutional designs here. So we've got presidentialism, and when we read Lintz's article about the perils of presidentialism, it's heavily shaped by his analysis of the failure of the Chilean democratic system in 1973 and how the inflexibility, rigidity, and zero-sum nature of presidentialism contributed to that. So you've got the institutional designs, the way they may shape flexible and compromising or highly polarizing politics and party systems. In a context of polarization, the military may see an opportunity, the international actors might get panicked that, oh my God, our corporations are not going to be able to have free reign there, or the Soviets might get another beachhead in Latin America. that sort of thing. Then you get into why was Chilean politics so polarized? Well, it had very extreme levels of economic inequality. So then you get to the kind of deeper measures at the back end of this diagram that have to do with what's the social structure. Not only what are the levels of economic development, but what's the class structure? What are the levels of inequality in the country? And how might that be giving rise to political cleavages, political polarization, that sort of thing. And if you've got a growing economy with relatively limited inequality and lots of opportunity for upward mobility across generations, then that should, be seen as positive in terms of social justice, growth, development, and contribute to legitimacy. But if you've got a bad situation that way with a lot of social injustice, inequality, exclusion, marginalization of the poor or of indigenous groups, so then or ethnic minorities, so then you start getting into the ethnic structure of the country. That's going to have negative effects on beliefs about the legitimacy of the system and could create significant elements of the society that simply reject the legitimacy of a democracy that they feel doesn't include them, doesn't give them meaningful voice, and doesn't work for them. Okay, so this is some of the ways, I could go on for the next 2 hours about this slide, but I'm trying to get you to see how much of the course kind of is swept into this one important and highly imaginative diagram.